This is Franklin Rye, and welcome back to Political Spirits. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, one subject we need to talk about is Joe Biden. Specifically, we need to talk about his strange tendency to hug for extended periods of time women, teenage girls, and female children, including those just a few years old. The hugs often include burying his face in their hair, kissing it, and it appears that he's sniffing their hair. Now, we can have a discussion about men engaging in inappropriate conduct with women, pressuring them into physical contact to which they've not consented, and the whole Me Too movement. But I think that makes this discussion a bit too complex. I think the simpler way to characterize the discussion we need to have about Joe Biden is, what the hell? Joe Biden has released a video defending his conduct and stating that it was a product of a time when there was not the heightened sensitivity we have now regarding personal space. No, Joe, the way you behave has always been creepy. It has never been an accepted norm. Go back and watch the videos. Anybody out there who hasn't seen them and yet has decided where they stand on this discussion, I encourage you to step back, recognize you don't actually have the information needed to make a decision, then go watch the videos and decide what you think. Without it, you're just making your decision entirely based on the defense issued by the politician who's being targeted for the criticism. And I always question the wisdom of doing that. Or you're making your decision based on conclusions reached by journalists or political commentators, and based on the last couple of years of journalism, and you should definitely put that term in quotes, we should all question the wisdom of doing that. When you watch the videos, take a look at the reactions of the people having their hair sniffed. Take a look at the reactions of the little girls who were clearly uncomfortable with what Joe Biden was doing. Watch them move away from him, and in some instances watch him continue to move forward towards them. You find videos where he places his hand on a little girl's right shoulder and then appears to move it across her breast, even as she tries to move away. You'll find videos where he tells little girls they can't date until they're 31. That's weird. Who meets a little girl and thinks about how old they should be when they date? Have you watched the video where Biden is part of a group photo and the girl looks to be about 12 years old and is in front of him in a red dress, and he places his hand on her waist on her left side and she looks down at it? Clearly, she thinks it's odd. He then conducts her father's swearing-in ceremony, and he pulls her over by her arm so that she's up against him within a hair's breadth of him while he's conducting the ceremony. Afterwards, he puts his hand on her right arm and pulls her over against him and says something to her. This was shown on C-SPAN. In another photo-taking session for some sort of ceremony, a girl who looks to be perhaps 7 or 8 years old is immediately in front of him in a long red skirt with a black top. He places his hand on her right arm just below her shoulder, and then appears to cup his hand slightly and start moving it across her right breast. She moves forward and to the left in an apparent attempt to avoid him grasping her chest. I'm not making this up. It's bizarre, and it's on film, and it's displayed on C-SPAN. Finally, watch the video of Senator Jeff Sessions meeting then VP Joe Biden. Senator Sessions is with his granddaughter, who appears to be about 5 years old. Joe Biden reaches down towards the child, and right before Biden's hand is about to make contact with the child's right shoulder, Sessions waves his hand over her left shoulder twice before Biden's hand is about to reach it, effectively blocking Biden's hand. In reaction, Biden pulls his hand back and never touches the girl. What does that look like? It looks like Jeff Sessions knew that Biden had a tendency to touch young girls in an odd way, or a way that makes them feel uncomfortable in these photo sessions, and he took steps to stop it when it was his granddaughter. Do I think Joe Biden's a pedophile? No, I don't. I suspect he's just weird, and I do have some thoughts about what may be behind the weirdness. Have you seen the photo of the biker lady sitting on a chair in front of VP Joe Biden? In fact, she's sitting so close that people often mistakenly believe that she's sitting on his lap. He has one hand on each of her shoulders and is leaning in and saying something to her, and she's laughing. Now, unlike the photos with the kids, this one doesn't bother me, because obviously it doesn't raise the same level of concern and present the same appearance of potential impropriety, because she's an adult. Moreover, she's laughing and appears to be enjoying herself. I mentioned the photo because of the look that appears on the two bikers who were sitting on either side of Biden and looking at Biden and the woman who was with them. Take a close look at their faces and ask yourself what would have happened in this situation if Joe Biden were not a powerful politician. I suspect they would have beaten the hell out of him. And that brings me to my point in referencing that photograph. Some people have asked whether Joe Biden is an abuser of women. Some have asked whether he's a pedophile. Some have asked whether he's a pervert. Some have asked whether he's just a very friendly guy who doesn't really know where boundaries stand. And those in that last category are most likely to accept his explanation that times have changed and he just simply hasn't changed with them. I'm in none of those categories. I have a theory. I think he's on a power trip. I think in situations like the one with the two bikers and the woman that was with them, Biden gets off on the fact that he could give a shoulder rub and apparently flirt with a biker chick in immediate proximity to the two bikers she was with, all three of them dressed in their leather biker outfits, and there's not a darn thing the two guys could do about it because he was the Vice President of the United States. Look back at those photo sessions with the little kids. In each case, at least one parent is there, usually the father and sometimes both parents. Yet Biden was able to snuggle up against little girls in a way that if a stranger did it in your neighborhood, you would at least pull the kid away and potentially beat the hell out of the guy. Now, you might say that's unfair, that Biden is really just a friendly old guy in these circumstances, and he's more like a Santa in a mall than a stranger in the neighborhood. In that respect, you have a point. But the way that Joe Biden puts his hands on little girls goes way beyond what a Santa Claus in the mall does. And there's no way of avoiding the fact that it's weird, and it's on video. Incidentally, this is where the humor on Twitter shines. Somebody started #BidenAmovie on Twitter, and if you want a good chuckle, you have to go there. Movies include The Touchables, Forrest Grope, Forrest Hump, Scent of a Woman's Hair, American Sniffer, What's Eating Gilbert Grope, Return to the Pet Eye, Pulp Friction, Waiting to Inhale, The Breakfast Rub, and Beverly Hills Cop a Feel. It just goes on and on. Next topic. Anti-Christian hate. Let's talk about recent allegations leveled by a whistleblower at Google. As noted in the April 5 edition of Breitbart.com, in an article by Alum Bakari, Google software engineer Mike Wacker is in charge of the Republican listserv at Google, and he alleges that he's been attacked by employees of Google because of his beliefs. The article is based on Wacker's article on Medium.com entitled The Cruelty of Google's Call-Out Culture, which was published on April 4. Wacker points out that Google created an advisory council of individuals from outside Google to promote responsible development of artificial intelligence. The 8-member council included a conservative African-American woman, Kay Coles James, who's the president of the Heritage Foundation, the well-known conservative think tank. The left-wing outrage mob ramped up, as usual, and as Wacker notes, it included many Google employees, thousands of whom signed a petition to remove K. Coles James from the council. A Google employee group that was pushing for the removal called itself Googlers Against Transphobia and Hate. In that respect, the position of those employees was typical of the left. I'm not aware of any evidence that K. Coles James or the Heritage Foundation is motivated by transphobia or hate or, quote, rhetorical violence, close quote, as one employee described it. It's just a typical reaction of the left-wing mob. In this case, the mob consisted of Google employees. But Wacker didn't focus in his article on the mob attacks against Ms. James. Instead, he asserted that Google employees engage in similar aggressive attacks on fellow Google employees when they hold political opinions which differ from those of the left. To demonstrate this point, Wacker published the content of emails on one of Google's internal forums, after deleting the names of the individuals engaged in the online conversation, except his own name. In the exchange, Google employees claim that Wacker's support for the Alliance Defending Freedom, or ADF, is inexcusable, describing it as a hate group and claiming that it advocates for the criminalization of homosexuality. Wacker rebuts the claim by noting that the ADF has won 3 cases in the Supreme Court just in the last 2 terms alone. So what exactly is the ADF? The Alliance Defending Freedom is an organization committed to protecting freedom of religion. The organization was formed in 1994 and has been extremely successful in U.S. federal courts in challenging restrictions on religious liberty in the U.S. Between 2011 and 2018, the ADF won 9 separate cases in the Supreme Court. That impressive record has bolstered the ADF's influence on legal matters in America. The cases that the Alliance Defending Freedom won include the Masterpiece Cake Shop case out of Colorado, which involved a Colorado Christian bake shop owner's refusal to bake a cake specifically for a gay wedding. That win was based on the court's conclusion that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had shown hostility towards the religious claims of the baker. Note that there were only 2 dissenting justices in that decision. It was a 7-2 decision, so it clearly was not simply a left versus right matter. Another case won by the ADF overturned a California state law which required anti-abortion pregnancy centers to post notices about the availability of state-subsidized abortions. That decision was 5-4. ADF won a unanimous Supreme Court decision in a case involving a town which allowed large political signs to be left up for extended periods, but had very short deadlines and small size restrictions for signage directing people to events including church services. My point with these specifics is that ADF is not an extremist organization. It has won multiple cases at the Supreme Court, including unanimous decisions. Now, we've talked in this podcast in the past about the activities of the Southern Poverty Law Center and its practice of labeling as hate groups organizations which are part of mainstream conservative thought, and then grouping them in with truly offensive organizations such as neo-Nazi groups and the Ku Klux Klan. We've also talked in the past in this podcast about how the Southern Poverty Law Center's labeling of the Family Research Council as a hate group prompted a domestic terrorist to plan and attempt an armed attack on their headquarters. Thankfully, no one was killed in that attack, but a guard was shot in the leg while attempting to disarm the terrorist. Just as the Family Research Council didn't deserve the hate group label from the SPLC, the Alliance Defending Freedom doesn't deserve it either. In the instance we're discussing here, the Google employees ran with that designation of the ADF as a hate group by the SPLC. Of course, Google employees also objected to K. Cole James from the Heritage Foundation being on the Google Artificial Intelligence Council. They accused the conservative black woman of bigotry, transphobia, and exterminationism, whatever that means. Once again, the Heritage Foundation is a mainstream conservative organization. You can find the emails in question linked to the April 5 Breitbart article. And if you think this is some isolated incident, Keep in mind that an employee posting an article from National Review entitled Intersectionality, the Dangerous Faith by David French was enough at Google for an employee to report him to HR. Now, just for some perspective here, National Review is a relatively moderate conservative publication. Moreover, David French was one of the first activist anti-Trump conservatives during the 2016 presidential campaign, and he even considered running against Trump in the general election as an independent. So why do I bring all this up? Well, think about how much conversation there's been recently about giant technology companies censoring conservatives. It's been a common theme among those on the right to address the left-leaning nature of the leadership of those companies when discussing the censorship. Or, in the case of Google, arguments that they manipulate search results to boost left-wing opinions and personalities. My point is I agree that the leadership of those companies very clearly leans to the left, and I'm extremely skeptical of their claims that they're not taking biased actions against conservative voices. However, with an employee base as left-wing as appears to be the case, even without left-wing leadership, there would be a significant likelihood that voices on the right would be suppressed or minimized or hobbled in some way because of likely actions of employees who think those voices are so offensive that they deserve to be oppressed. Every one of us should be extremely concerned about the power that these tech companies possess. The obvious bias in companies so powerful that they have the ability to influence the outcome of elections and the formations of opinions in our society is a serious problem for any country that at least contends it operates under democratic principles. Next topic. Neighbors to the north, not so free. On March 27, 2019, the British Columbia Human Rights Tribunal issued a decision regarding a complaint filed against an individual named William Watcott, contending that he had violated the Human Rights Code by circulating a flyer in opposition to a transgender woman's campaign for public office. Among other things, the flyer identified the woman as transgender, referred to her as a biological male, and used the male name that she had used prior to identifying as a transgender female. In the flyer, Watcott also opposed her candidacy based on the fact that she's transgender, stated that there are only two genders, and also made multiple negative statements about transgenderism and homosexuality, including certainly insensitive comments regarding venereal diseases and homosexuality, couching much of the criticisms as based on Christian doctrine, and included biblical references and quotes. Mr. Watcott was arrested and held for a short period in jail, apparently more than a day. At the hearing on the matter, Mr. Watcott was defiant, wearing a T-shirt displaying the face of the transgender candidate and stating that the candidate was, quote, still a guy, close quote. Notwithstanding admonition by the tribunal, Mr. Watcott continued to wear the shirt. In his response, Mr. Watcott stated that he saw the tribunal, quote, as an affront to freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, close quote. The British Columbia Human Rights Tribunal's conclusion? It found that Mr. Watcott had indeed violated the Human Rights Act. It ordered him to cease the conduct, pay the candidate $35,000 for, quote, injury to her dignity, feelings, and self-respect, close quote, and pay the tribunal $20,000 as costs for improper conduct, as well as post-judgment interest. Mr. Watcott was a bus driver, but lost his job during the controversy, apparently because of complaints regarding the positions he expressed. He is advised he does not have enough money to pay the fine. Does this result surprise you? Does it disturb you? It certainly disturbs me. I don't particularly like the way Mr. Watcott handled himself. I don't think that just because somebody is a transgendered woman, they shouldn't be elected to office. Mr. Watcott apparently does think that. But I have a hard time wrapping my head around the idea that somebody that chooses to run for public office should be free from criticism based on what they are or where they stand, even if the criticism is offensive. In fact, I don't quite understand how you could even run for public office if you can't handle things being said about you which are offensive. You can find the full text of the Human Rights Tribunal's decision at massresistance.org. I wish I had a web address for a neutral organization for a copy of the decision, but unfortunately I don't. Go to page 42 of the decision and you'll find this statement. Quote, "There are two aspects of freedom of religion, the right to hold religious beliefs and the right to manifest them. Nothing in this complaint threatens Mr. Watcott's right to hold his religious beliefs about gender. The only potential limitation arises with respect to the way he is permitted to manifest them." Close quote. That statement should terrify you. Basically, it's saying you're entitled to hold certain religious beliefs, but for some religious beliefs, you have to keep your mouth shut. The tribunal goes further in its analysis. Quote, "There is a conflict in this case between Mr. Watcott's religious belief that he should do everything in his power to stop a transgender woman from being elected to political office, and Ms. Ogre's right, and the right of trans people more broadly, to enjoy equal and dignified participation in the political life of this province." Close quote. I find it stunning that the tribunal seems to think that the vociferous objection of one voter through a pamphlet to a particular candidate prevents that candidate from engaging in dignified participation in political life. What if Mr. Watcott ran for office and someone opposed him with flyers saying, "You shouldn't elect an evangelical Christian"? Would that person be violating the Human Rights Code based on their singling out evangelical Christians as not worthy of public office? I don't know, but it certainly seems like a criticism a citizen should be able to make against somebody running for political office without fear of being cited for a criminal violation. It's a 105-page decision, so I know the recommendation I'm about to give is unlikely to be followed, but I recommend you read the decision. The reason is because you may be as shocked as I was, not with just the verbiage that I've quoted, but with the entire tenor of the decision, the social perspectives on which it appears to be based, and the verbiage used. In short, it is exactly like the verbiage used in extremely left-wing publications, often ones issued on campus, addressing social issues. It is not the kind of verbiage that I expect from a legal tribunal. One final, eye-opening piece of verbiage from that tribunal. Quote, "To the extent that a decision by this tribunal affects Mr. Watcott's religious rights, it is a relatively minor limitation. He remains free to hold his religious beliefs and communicate them privately." Close quote. Think about that. It reminds me of the depictions I've seen of religion practiced behind the Iron Curtain, with citizens huddled in private to practice their religion for fear of being discovered by the authorities. It's a sobering thought. Once Canadian legal tribunals start taking the position that you can hold religious beliefs, but it isn't a problem for the government to prevent you from publicly expressing them, just how much further do you have to go before you get into Iron Curtain territory? There will be no Iron Curtain separating Political Spirits listeners from next week's episode. In the interim, feel free to express your beliefs, political, religious, or otherwise, and I'll express mine in the next episode. Until then, be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits, and not just your friends in your home state. Tell others in other states as well. I'm looking for listeners in all 50 states, and actually worldwide as well, and I'm not quite there yet. And follow me on Twitter at Franklin Rye. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.